and good evening. It's November 18th, 2025, and we're continuing our discussion collection in our Outside the Class series. This series, from the Bible Project, it covers the entire TaNaK, also known as the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Those source videos, they're available for your review. They're on TheDustyFeet.com, and they're in the Outside the Class section. Because the intent of Outside the Class is for you to get to listen to that in-class lecture first. They're usually short little vids. These we try to keep to about 15 minutes. I want to make them easy to catch up on. So we are on a quest. We're going scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but maybe with a little fun and different twist. Our hope with the Dusty Feet is to foster discussion and to help build and support communities. If you're not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. TheDustyFeet.com. That's our primary place to find everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Substack. Link is in the description below. It's designed around the written and spoken text. It's a place to connect to ourselves and others. 3. Facebook at TheDustyFeet. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. 4. And as always, you're welcome to send an email to bob@thedustyfeet.com. These places, they will be moderated and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation. Belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. Of course, and before we forget, if you do find these kinds of podcasts useful, that is when you click that subscribe button. But the reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that is when you do click that like button, because it is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So in this series, right, we're covering the entire TaNaK, the Old Testament. We're going to do it in the original order of those Hebrew scriptures. We also need to remember that all the videos we use, they're just the tip of an iceberg. They are part of this entire learning series that I highly recommend. Of course, all of them can be found on the Bible Project's website, because we're going to ask many questions about all kinds of things. Answers? We'll see. Samuel, second scroll. This is our part 1, and I have so been looking forward to starting the second scroll of Samuel, right? And we're going to do, right off the bat, right, we're going to get into things that are, well, they're probably going to begin to challenge us. You know, here in the Dusty Feet, we often try on the sandals of those in this text. So we say, okay, putting on the sandals. This one, we're going to put on the sandals of David, yeah? So we learn the story of David as he's discovering Saul's death, right? This has been of late a bit of a roller coaster for David, yeah? I mean, David just coming off the very successful rescue of his 2 wives and the rest of everybody else's family, right? And all the things that went with that. And so right now, he's gone from being just a little bit earlier the topic of conversation for being stoned, right? To where now he's a hero. And amongst that, he's even spreading wealth around to the other areas. But it didn't take long for the news to get to David that Saul had died, so it's only been a few days. But this young man shows up, clothes torn, dirt on his head, and he comes to David, collapses on the ground, and he knows who David is. He understands who David is. And David asks him, "Where do you come from?" He said, "I come from the camp of Israel." So David, he asks him, "So how'd the battle go?" And he tells him the army was routed and that Saul and his son Jonathan had died. So it's interesting here for me here because, you know, we often have messengers. They're delivering their news. Their reports are rarely questioned. I mean, I'm not saying it should or shouldn't be. It's just merely that they just take the news and then they act on it. But David, I don't know whether it's the shock of the news, the importance of the news, he just digs in a little more. He wants to verify more of the information that's coming from this young lad in front of him. And he asks him, says, how do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan died? And this is when we get to a slightly different account of Saul's demise, right? The account that we just finished reading in the first scroll mentions that Saul, he fell on his own sword, and he died, having asked his armor bearer to do it for him, and he couldn't. So Saul killed himself. And the sword bearer, well, he killed himself. However, when we get to this story from this young man, and let's remember, he is coming to David to share the information with him. He does not have to tell David this. The text mentions nothing to suggest that someone is directing him to tell David. He is doing this on accord. He is seeking David out. So here's the brief story that this young man tells David. It starts in verse 6. The young man, reporting to him, said, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and Saul was leaning on his spear, while the chariots and the horsemen drew close around him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called to me. And I answered, Here, sir. And he said to me, Who are you? And I answered to him, I'm an Amalekite. So he said to me, Come, stand over me, kill me. For convulsions have seized me, and my life, well, it still lingers. So I stood over him, and I killed him, for I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord. So it's passages like these. I find them fascinating, and yet I also find them very challenging. And I probably wouldn't be surprised if the Jewish sages, well, they probably have a lot going on here, because there's a lot going on here. But I suppose it depends on whether you're seeking an explanation. Are you looking for a reason? Are you just trying to reconcile things? So these are some of those passages that I know I'm going to have questions about. I know I'm going to put them in a box, put a nice bow on them, stick them on the shelf, because I realize that maybe I'm not going to have an answer for this clearly right now. Maybe down the road we'll get a little more. Part of that could help because the story that goes on, well, I think it's going to raise more questions. Suffice to say that the news devastates David. He tears his clothes in grief. All the men around him, well, they did the same thing. They tore their clothes. These men, they're mourning the death of the God-appointed King of Israel. But then we get those challenging thoughts that, right? Remember, we're wearing sandals. David, right? And David had his fair share of interactions with Saul that have been less than pleasing. Because, I mean, I'll be honest, Saul's tried to end David's life more than once, multiple times, and yet David refuses to take Saul's life twice, right? Understanding that it's God's job to do that. So we've been talking also here about, as we've been going through, right, as we're getting towards the end, we're paying attention to the character of David. We're paying attention to how David responds in all these different situations. Because yes, David's a man, but he's also he's set apart by God. He is one whom is after God's own heart, but he's still a man. He's still subject to his own frustrations, his own emotions, his own reactions. Because it says that they mourned and they wept and they fasted until the evening. But then David said to this young man, and he said, So where do you come from? And his answer is, I'm the son of a resident alien. I'm an Amalekite. And then what can be looked at next, right? Because I'll agree that on the surface, and I hope there are many questions to ask, and I really hope you're asking these among yourself. Because it's about David's response to this young man, right? It starts in verse 14, and David said to him, Were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy Yahweh's anointed? Then David called to one of the young men and said, Come here, strike him down. So he struck him down, and he died. And then David said to him, Your blood is on your head, For your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed Yahweh's anointed. So I want to pause. Take a step back. I want to reflect on where we are in the story. God told Saul that he and his lineage, his sons, right, they're going to die the next day. After, remember that Samuel's spirit is summoned from an oracle. There's boxes for that. But Saul goes to battle, and in the first scroll, Saul kills himself. In the second scroll, it appears as if he hadn't finished the job, mortal injury, but he needs this young man to finish it for him. Because remember that we've discussed last week that Saul, he doesn't want to suffer at the hands of the Philistines. He doesn't want to be a tool for them while he's alive, right? He knows he can't do anything after he's dead. But he knows he doesn't want to be part of anything while he's still alive. And God had told him, you're going to die. So whether Saul did it or this young Amalekite finishes the job, David even mentioned before that he hoped that Saul would die in battle. God's task is being accomplished. I think maybe one could carefully use the phrase, God's will is being done. Oh, it's probably going to cause some people to pause, and I kind of hope it does. But I hope that, again, it raises questions among yourselves as to what's going on. Because now we've had the opportunity to hear. Yeah? This young man, he didn't need to do this. He had not been sent by someone else to perform the task, right? He's doing it on his own. He brings David something that would have been very important to him, because it's also something that the Philistines did not obtain. It was Saul's crown. It was the amulet. The amulet, it's a royal identifier. The crown, put them together. One, they're important. Two, they're probably also extremely valuable. And this young man, he thinks he's doing the right thing. He's delivering this news to David. But in the story, it doesn't get any cleaner. It gets messier from here. But the bottom line is this young man has been part of God's actions. He just delivers the news to David. David has him killed. And even that, he even throws his own little curse at him. To me. And I can see how people view it, and they look at it differently. But it seems that this stretches our examination of David's character. It hasn't always been perfect character, mind you. We've been getting glimpses into David's character as he's becoming this man that's going to eventually wear the crown. But I think here, maybe he acted a bit rashly. Saul had tried to kill himself unsuccessfully. This boy just does what Saul asks. But yes, David's hurt. Yes, David is devastated. Not just by the loss of the king. He's also lost his father-in-law. And I guess it probably invokes some mixed emotions, mixed feelings in him. And it would be for me too. Because I'm a real person. I'm in David's sandals, and that's a grace I have to give David. These are mixed emotions. And on top of that, there's the death of Jonathan. Somebody he was only very important to him. David loved him very, very much. But we also need to know that David was prepared for this still in a way, right? Let's be honest. He was arguing not too long ago to go to this very battle against this very army of Israel. The Philistines just told him to go home. They did the business. Yeah, I get it. I get the young man's and Amalekite, right? And those, right? Don't forget, those were the very people who burned David's town. And they took his wives. They took the families of everyone else. But maybe he lumps this boy in with all the others. And maybe he didn't hear him. Because even though he is an Amalekite, he's acting outside of what appears to be this other people group. Because he not only comes to him, honors him, delivers the news, but he also gives him these objects of great value. So this might be a messy term for me to associate with this. Because it evokes a mental picture of things when I want to put questions in a box. But to me, when I heard this part with David and he's saying this stuff, I heard this is the pot calling the kettle black, right? To me, it's clear it's unclear, but I mean, this is really messy because I think one of the most reassuring things to me in the aspect is God's justice, God's ultimate justice. Fortunately, that's given to God. God gets to balance all of the injustices from and to everyone. And I think it also includes this young man. And that also helps give me, well, some of my greatest hope. Let's get back to the story. So David's also showing another side of himself, because when we get at this, evidenced by his writing of his tomes, right, his poetry, his songs, and of course, we get this little clip in verse 18. It seems like a little backwards insert, because he needs to tell the people where the story came from and how long he wants them to say it, right? Verse 17, David intoned his lamentation over Saul and his son Jonathan. And then 18 adds a parenthesis, and it says, he ordered that the song of the bow be taught to the people of Judah. It's written in the book of Jasher. And he said, and what follows is a beautiful song, a tragic song. I wonder what it sounded like. I encourage you all to read the text, the end of chapter 1, because that's where we find David's lament for Saul and Jonathan. And in it, you can hear the pain. You can hear his willingness not to dishonor and the wanting of this story to be told forevermore. So next week, we're going to delve into the second chapter. Well, we're going to explore David's now anointing as king, although that's still going to be messy because it seems not everybody else is on board. So thank you for joining us tonight on the first episode of the second scroll of Samuel on the Dusty Feet.